Okay, this is a little harder than I thought. Hey, my name's Adrian. I've only ever posted one video on this channel before about Judas and the Black Messiah. I'm actually pretty proud of that video. I made it like 3 years ago. Had to re-upload it because it had sound issues for the first 2 years of it being around. Um, but I felt like it'd be a good idea or be fun to kind of like come on and talk about what I've been reading. Um, just as kind of like an exercise in putting myself out there and like I don't know, like being more creative because I think that's something that I really want to work on, especially right now. This past month, March specifically, a little bit of February, I've been reading a lot more than I usually do. And I used to read a lot like as a kid, like YA stuff when I was a kid, but I've been reading a lot more recently, and it's been a lot of fun, and I've been really enjoying it. And it's been different to like, I mean, I play a lot of video games, and I feel like, well, it's just been kind of different. um, and I have like a nice pile now that I've read throughout the month of March and some of February. So I feel like it'd be fun to kind of talk about um, what I've been reading, and then kind of later on what I plan to read, hopefully into the rest of the month and going forward. There's a few series that I want to talk about. One series I want to talk about that like has been taking up my entire brain this entire month. So I'm really excited about that. To talk about that and maybe kind of pick my own brain about it and see what I think, because when I sit down and write like a Goodreads review about it, it's a lot harder to like figure out exactly what my thoughts are than to actually talk it out. I feel like I don't know. I've never done this before, but I'll start off with what I started reading, which is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Fantastic book. I think that the first time that I heard about this book was I watched this YouTuber called Aegon of Astora. He makes Soulsborne content, specifically kind of the lore and the philosophy, pedagogy behind Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and I've been a fan of his for a long time. Fan of those video games for a long time. I'm sure I'll have to make a video on that if I decide to keep this going. I don't even remember what it was that he said. But it really made me interested in the book, and anything that he recommends, I'm like, let me check that out. But I had started reading it a long time ago, before I kind of had this like reading renaissance this March and this February, and even then I really liked it. I read probably the first quarter to third of the book probably like a year and a half to 2 years ago, and those first few essays were really powerful already, and I don't know why I didn't keep reading. I think again it was just kind of I wasn't in a reading mood. It's kind of a series of essays, and she kind of marries science and indigenous knowledge, and writes essays kind of combining those two things. The way that she describes science in comparison to kind of indigenous knowledge, and how you can't have one without the other if you want to have like a solid understanding of nature and of the world, and how powerful it is to combine those two things in the way that she does is so beautiful. I really want to read her next book, or her previous book, Gathering Moss, but I haven't been able to find that anywhere. I always look for it when I'm at Barnes and Noble, but they only ever have this beautiful this beautiful hardbound copy of Braiding Sweetgrass that I also really want, but it's white. They're all white, and I feel like I'd ruin it. Really changed the way that I think about nature, the way that I think about people, the way that I think about myself in relation to nature. Probably one of the most transformative books that I've ever read. I finished this book probably late February, I finished this book I think early March, but I think I started reading it early February. So I was reading it very slowly. This was still kind of in the beginning of me getting kind of back into reading. This really started me off, and I kept going after this. But one of my favorite quotes from this book, very short quote from one of the stories that she tells, is "The cure grows near to the cause." And I think that the story that it goes with is the story that she tells of a trip that she took some students on, where they went into the wilderness to camp without any supplies, and they were supposed to figure out how to gather everything that they needed for just to live. Essentially, what she meant by the cure grows near to the cause, I think she connected it to the fact that they were gathering cattail. And as they were gathering cattail, it was like bright. It was in the middle of summer, and it was really hot out, and the kids were getting sunburned. And as they were gathering that cattail, she explained the gel from this cattail is actually really effective at treating sunburns. I think that that's how she connected the cure being near to the cause. And I just thought that was really powerful, and you could connect that to so many other things, not just nature. That is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. The next book that I picked up that I've been wanting to read for a very long time is The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. I loved it. I think there were a lot of parts where I did kind of have to slog through it, but I think that's just because of the age of the book. There were some parts where they're traveling, a lot of parts where they're traveling throughout Middle Earth, and they have to stop for food. They have to stop to rest. Oh, did you eat yet? Oh, I haven't been sleeping. Oh, I'm really tired. Oh, it's just, and that kind of was a little bit of a slog, I guess, as someone who's spoiled by like video games and movies where you kind of skip to the good part. And again, that's kind of, I'm just picking up reading again, so I'm not used to that, but I still really, really enjoyed it. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was my strong dislike of Tolkien in the beginning in his introduction. He talks about allegory and how he really doesn't like allegory, and I love allegory. I think it's like one of the most important like ways to write or ways to create anything. I think it's the first thing that I always think about, and I think maybe because it challenged me so much and it challenged what I've always thought about stories in general is why I was so resistant to it. So maybe there's something to it, but I remember in the introduction he talks about how people try to compare it to real life events that he lived through and try to say like, oh, this is an allegory for this and this is an allegory for this, and he completely rejects all of that and says, no, this is its own story, like it completely rejects all of that. And I was really, really resistant to it because even if he meant it like that, even if he did not mean to compare it to anything else that he lived through, I love the idea that no matter what, as humans creating art, you are kind of putting forward your own experience, consciously or unconsciously. So the fact that he was so resistant to that idea really kind of put me off, because I really like that idea. Like, I don't think that things can just come from nowhere. I don't think that you can just make something from nothing. I think that what's beautiful about creating things is that that's not how it works. How it works is that you exist and you live and you collect all these experiences, and from those experiences you create something new that is necessarily influenced by everything that you've ever seen, heard, smelt, touched. And I think that's what's so beautiful about art. So the fact that he feels differently to that was really challenging to me. And that kind of colored my perception of the entire book, where I was kind of thinking about that the entire time. I wasn't expecting to make this video while I was reading, so I didn't make any notes. I did really enjoy my way through this book. A lot of why it took me a little while to read through this, it took me a little bit to kind of slog through the more boring parts, is because I'm so used to modern fantasy stories on TV or in video games. But I still think I'm very happy that I read this. I think it's an incredibly important book to read if you're into fantasy in general, which I very much am. So that was the next thing I read. Right after that, I went right into The Two Towers. I enjoyed this a little bit more. There's, of course, a lot more action. That's not necessarily what I enjoy about books. I don't really care that much about action. If anything, fight scenes are my least favorite parts of reading fantasy books, or I guess books in general, because I kind of have trouble picturing exactly what the characters are doing. I guess I'm not as interested in the action parts. I love dialogue, and this has a lot of that. There's a lot of talking. I really liked it. Side note, I really like these copies and how little they are. They were so easy to just pick up in your hand and just read with one hand, and I had never had that easy of a time reading a book, like physically. But yeah, really liked The Two Towers. There's a lot more, I feel like there's a lot more dialogue in this, a little bit more philosophizing, which is what I really, really like about sci-fi fantasy books. I don't know. I liked it. I like The Two Towers. I don't have a lot more thoughts on this. Next time I will take more notes. Sorry. But as I was reading The Two Towers, this is a book that I finished very, very quickly. I read Dune. Aside from Braiding Sweetgrass, which is kind of in a completely different category, Dune was definitely my favorite thing that I read all month. In a long time, actually. I really, really loved Dune. I had tried reading this before a few years ago. Again, just struggled to finish things in general, and I'm kind of getting better at that right now. Even just making this, but I liked it then, and I like it now. The reason that I wanted to pick it up again was because of the reason that anyone else is picking it up again, because the movie, because Dune 2 came out recently, and I wanted to read the full book by the time that the movie came out, and that was kind of a challenge that I gave myself. But I've been trying to kind of keep promises to myself a little bit more, build some self-trust. So I maybe shouldn't have made that promise to myself, but I kept it. I got through like half of the book by the time that I needed to finish it to actually go watch the movie. So the day that I had set up to watch the movie with my friends, the entire morning and afternoon before I went to see the movie, all I did was read Dune, and I finished the entire other half that same day, which is probably not a lot for most people, but again, I'm not used to reading. I haven't read in a long time, so I felt really good about myself for that. And I didn't like rush through it. I paid a lot of attention, and it was very easy to pick this up and not put it down, especially the last half. Probably my favorite fiction series of all time now, and I've only read the first 2 books, just because of the themes and everything that it talks about. In the first book, I guess it's kind of setting the tone for everything else. In the first half of the book, it's setting the tone for everything else. I didn't struggle with it. I loved it when I read it a while ago, but that, I think waiting to get to the parts that I knew were there and that I was really looking forward to was maybe why I couldn't finish it at the time. But kind of to explain exactly what I was looking for in this book was the mystical aspect of it, the spice, getting into taking the spice, drinking I don't remember what it was called, but the blue juice, the visions, there's an entire chapter in this book where it's just Paul having a vision. I think there's an entire other chapter where it's just Jessica having a vision. Just fantastic descriptions of basically tripping, which I think is just so much fun to read. The way that it's done is just so intelligent, and you can tell that, like, I know for a fact that it goes somewhere. Everything that happens during these visions are signs of what will happen in the future, and that's what Paul feels too. That's what all the other characters feel too, and being able to read that and experience that on the same level that they're experiencing it, because I get to actually feel it, because Frank Herbert does a fantastic job of describing what is being felt, what's being seen. Just so cool. So it really does feel like you have this power that Paul has. You have the ability to somewhat see the future, but there's parts that you can't see, and it's somewhat symbolic. So really fun read. Really like changed the way that I felt about writing in general. Like, I've never read a book where the author describes something as intimate and mystical as like a vision that someone has as they're taking some kind of psychedelic. So that was extremely interesting to me. Also, of course, the ecological aspects. I believe Frank Herbert was it an ecologist? Sorry if I'm getting that wrong, but clearly an expert in everything to do with ecosystems and the way that a world should work. And that was another huge chunk of the book. The next book that I'm going to talk about is, and I love this copy, is The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. Probably the most important read that I had in terms of current events. I had read most of this book previously a few years ago, and was so enamored by it. So, like, everything that Fanon says in this book makes so much sense. You're able to tie it to so many things. I read this while I was reading Dune, which was really interesting. I found myself applying a lot of what Fanon was saying to the Fremen and to the events that happen in Dune. Of course, the reason that I picked this up, the main reason, was because of the events happening in occupied Palestine. I felt like this was one of the most important books that you can read to kind of set you up theory-wise when it comes to that. So that was really important to me, and I feel a lot more prepared to talk about things like this. Sartre's introduction, really great kind of overview of everything that Fanon covers in the rest of the book. Really powerful too, really kind of angry description of what Fanan's going to talk about. Definitely going to be rereading this multiple times throughout my life, I'm sure. Really, really important book. Definitely think everyone should read this, especially if you live in the Imperial Corps. The next book that I'm going to talk about, I don't have a physical copy of. I actually read this on my phone very quickly. I finished it probably in 2 days. I took longer to read it, but I probably took 2 days of actual reading to finish it. Dune Messiah. This is the most recent book that I finished. I finished this yesterday. Really doubles down on everything that I loved about Dune. A lot of the reviews that I had been seeing on Dune Messiah said that it was a lot less action. People liked it a little bit less. Even Brian Herbert, Frank Herbert's son, his introduction to Dune Messiah, it might have been his closing of the first Dune book that I kind of skipped through because there were some spoilers. He mentions how the audience did not like Dune Messiah when it came out. He mentioned that Frank Herbert had difficulties finding a publisher, getting the book published because of the fact that things don't go in the direction that you expect them to go in. So I was already kind of expecting that. I don't know. I enjoy that part. Not only that, though, that's kind of more the narrative aspect. This really, really doubles down on the mystical experiences. There's a lot of that. This is 12 years into the future. If I could just read an entire book of just vision sequences, I would. Like, that was hands down the most interesting part of this book. The way that you're able to see so many more characters in this book and their experiences and listen to their thought processes, their motivations was really interesting. The way that the book starts out is really cool too. It's kind of like an interrogation. That's all that I've read so far in March. I did start reading A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. I don't want to rush through this. I want to read this kind of as I get bored of more narrative books that I'm reading, more fiction books that I'm reading. I definitely will be continuing to read the Dune books probably as soon as possible. I am thinking I'm just going to start reading Children of Dune tonight. I want to read this at the same time as I read other books because it's a chunky boy and because it's covering some important stuff. It's a history of the United States told from the oppressed people's point of view, from the point of view of the indigenous people, from the point of view of black people living in America. He talks about how, and I really, really like this, I've always believed this, but how there's no such thing as unbiased, and how no matter what, when you're reading history, when you're being taught history, there is a perspective that's being taken. There's never a non-biased point of view. So he kind of explains this, and he says, most history books, most history that we learn in America is, of course, told from the lens of the victors. It's told from, the oppressor's point of view. And he decides to take a different course, which I think is really important. This is the only American history book that I'd be interested in reading. But I think that'll be fun to keep reading as I read other fiction books. I really like the way that when I read a nonfiction book, kind of what happened with The Wretched of the Earth and Dune, when you read a nonfiction book on top of a fiction book and kind of you get to put those two things together. So yeah, that's the thing that I'm reading right now. I hope this wasn't too all over the place. I didn't have an outline. But yeah, thank you for watching. Hope you have a good day.